governance is security in a way. So absolutely, and that's something that we're seeing, like momentum shifting in customers that are more aligned to that, like breaking those silos. But obviously, it's a journey, and it's going to take some cycles from the enterprises to kind of move in that direction. Back in the day when I started this identity management tool on premises, it took me a year and change to get rolling. Whereas here, we have been optimized and very deliberate to make sure that customers have the ability to do that at velocity and at scale quickly. So you can jump from, years to implement and have the controls to weeks.
In today's episode of Petri Dish, I'm talking to Ramiro Calderon and Jef Kazimer, who are both principal product managers for Microsoft Entra, and to Tee Earls, who's a product area lead for Entra ID Governance. In my conversation with Ramiro, Tee, and Jef, we cover how organizations should approach governance, implementing Entra ID Governance, and how Entra can be used to modernize hybrid environments to allow the cloud to be the control plane. And there's also lots more. So please enjoy the conversation. I'd like to welcome you, Ramiro, Tee, and Jef. Good morning. How are you today?
Doing well. The Seahawks won recently, so we're all very excited, even those who aren't based in Seattle.
Okay, great.
I will be a Seahawks fan for the week. It's okay.
Well, sadly here today, we're going to talk about something almost as exciting as that. We're going to talk about Microsoft Entra ID, more exciting possibly, Microsoft Entra ID Governance. So could you tell us what problems does Entra ID governance actually solve, and what can customers really expect to see as an outcome from this? So I'm going to put that to Ramiro.
Sure. So thank you for having us, Russell. So that's a great question, and the way I kind of see it is that identity governance is an essential tool for help customers to have a broader security posture in place, right? So if you look at it from the perspective of the zero trust principles, there's the least privilege, and by definition, not having a privilege until you need it, and while you need it is the kind of almost textbook definition of least privilege. So this is the problem that we want to solve for customers, and they're working backwards. We have to solve a number of things. For example, having the identities coming from a source of truth that determines not only the actual attributes, but also the life cycle. When employees come to the organization, either employees or vendors or contractors, and then they change over time, and finally when they leave, that is the main purpose, is to make sure that customers have the right access at the right time for the right workloads based on their job function.
Okay, great. So it's interesting you mentioned least privilege there, because I kind of consider that to be a separate security issue rather than a governance issue, but I guess they're actually quite tied together in some way.
I think I would add on to what Ramiro said from least privilege, right? I mean, when I talk with customers and everything, zero trust, for example, comes to mind. Customers that often that image that jumps to mind is hey, am I coming from a compliant device under my company's control, and from a known network location, and all of that type of stuff. But I think what Ramiro mentioned is really key to it, right? Which is, hey, if I'm an employee and I'm accessing a particular application, if I'm on a compliant device, if I'm coming from my corporate network, that's all great. But if I shouldn't have access to the application in the first place, maybe I legitimately used to have access, but have changed roles, right? How do we really automate this for customers during the joiner and mover and leaver processes so that access does not accumulate? And from the least privilege perspective, it's a core aspect to me of what zero trust is, right? You should have access you need, and the identity governance capabilities bring that question to customers and solve it, right? Which is, who has or should have access? What are they doing with the access? Are the right controls in place? Can we prove it to auditors and others, right? So I think the identity governance kind of brings these together in a way that they're not separate in my mind.
And I want to add to what he said. Least privilege is sometimes thought about being administrative privileges, but that's not one and the same, right? Least privileges can apply to your business applications. And the scenario where you have somebody who can make a sales order or who can approve a sales order, that's a higher privilege business function. So we want to be able to have those right governance controls to apply to all aspects of the business. And what I really enjoy about having governance capabilities in an identity platform such as Entra is that we're doing this for end users, admins, workload identities, and now as we're moving in this frontier space of AI and AI agents, we're able to manage that access and privileges for all those personas and AI agent identities as well on the same platform.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess there are three parts to this. You've got the part where you actually provision a user, then you've got the whole governance aspect where you manage the user through its entire life cycle, and then you've got security. Now, I think that some organizations approach these as separate initiatives, but how does Microsoft approach this? So I'll put that back to Ramiro.
Sure. And what you just told us, Russell, is what we keep hearing from customers, right? So we keep hearing this silo approach, especially with identity security. We typically see the HR system that does one part of it, and then the application owners do certain part of it, and there's a lot of blind spots in the middle. So we are, especially as we create a platform, as Jef was saying, where a lot of components feed off each other and interact with each other, it is a huge opportunity to have that unified signal. And we are encouraging our customers to think about this as one of the same motion, right? So while there are teams in the enterprise that have different specialties, it's important more now than ever to have those teams working closely together, because the threat actors and security and otherwise are always looking for those blind spots. So it's very important that customers see that, and essentially that's why we try to emphasize that least privilege also is a huge component of that. So we want to kind of spread that message of identity governance is essential for security. Governance is security in a way. So absolutely, and that's something that we're seeing, like momentum shifting in customers that are more aligned to that, like breaking those silos. But obviously, it's a journey, and it's going to take some cycles from the enterprises to kind of move in that direction.
We mentioned zero trust a little bit. I mean, I assume that you can't really achieve zero trust unless all of these things start connecting together and working together, these three parts.
Exactly. Verify explicitly is the one thing that is very hard when you're silo, right? So we typically say that verify explicitly is about the logs and the behavior analytics and all that. But there are many other signals that can be used and must be used to minimize risk. For example, if the user is unusual activity, maybe we can orchestrate a flow where, hey, maybe we should review the access of that person now that the risk increased. Or even, and there's not only security risk, it's also insider risk. So that's, that's probably another broader subject. But with Purview, for example, we feed off signal to detect that if the user is an insider risk. And that is a huge challenge top of mind from folks who care about identity governance, right? So that's another thing that we keep seeing is that customers that are that come back to us with specific scenarios of governance sometimes come with a framing of meeting a regulation or meeting an audit or present receipts to an audit. And in that context, they care a lot about the insider risk. So the platform itself is a huge tool for those customers to make sure that they use the signals from multiple places to achieve that security.
Okay, so Tee, imagine I come to you, I tell you that I'm going to, or I want to implement Entra ID Governance for the first time in my organization. Where would I start, and where could I see the biggest impact?
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. We get that definitely a lot. So first, we publish a bunch of kind of deployment guides and best practices and repeatable patterns that we see successfully, implemented at customers, right? So the first thing is making sure customers can read those and see kind of where they are, because the actual answer varies by customer often, right?
Right.
One of the things that we're really proud of and that resonates with customers is how quickly they can get value from the product, right? So this is not a set of capabilities that you have to deploy it all at the same time in a big bang deployment, or you get no value, right? Like those are kind of the historical patterns that you might have seen in kind of big packaged on-prem software solutions in the past, right? What we're really focused on is rapid time to value in the places that represent the biggest pain points, and often that's the manual processes today, right? So I think what I would describe to a customer is, hey, if we look across the continuum of what the governance capabilities bring, right, it starts from the pre-hire scenarios and bringing someone into the organization on day one and wanting them to have the right access and be productive from the get-go. And doing the identity verification during that onboarding, so especially in remote onboarding scenarios, right, that the person coming in actually is the person who you are expecting to commit, right? So the identity proofing capabilities and that day one full productivity out of the gate, right? Those are through the hey, you've defined your business policies about what birthright access should be, and that those are automatically assigned and ready to go, and onwards and onwards out through the joiner, mover, and leaver processes. So in terms of kind of where to start, right, it's saying, hey, where are you spending a significant amount of manual time today? Let's look at that as a good candidate to automate first. That's kind of one way to approach it. And then some other customers approach it and say, I have a biggest risk today in a particular space, and that's another way to approach it, right? Which is, hey, we have really disconnected processes when we offboard people, and we wind up leaving orphaned experiences everywhere of ownership that they had. They're gone from our organization, right? So the other way that customers approach it is looking at biggest pain points and risk, and focus on those first. And I'm sure we can go into this in more depth, but that's kind of the general pattern.
Right.
And Jef and Ramiro also, work a lot on the deployment. So I'd love to kind of get them to jump in too.
Yeah, I was going to add that one thing about when we see identity governance is security is that it applies to organizations of all sizes. It's not just these large megacorps that have to do governance. This could be your small 2-person organization even, but things that matter to them start at different phases. At a smaller organization, they have a lot of manual processes, SOPs, that they get immediate benefit from being able to automate, right? That frees them up to do more tasks that they don't need to manually do anymore. But as every organization has some sort of oversight or regulatory requirements, they were doing manually, again, automation and getting that centralized audit and visibility for them to be able to report and meet those audits. But then you get to the complex scenarios where delegation starts becoming important, more reporting and insight as things are automated across a larger surface area. And Entra really applies to organizations of all size by bringing governance today, not over years.
Right. So do you have an exact playbook? If there's an exact procedure that I want to follow, or you don't, because it really depends on what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. So we have deployment guidelines that Jef and I and others kind of document as we do it hundreds of times with customers over time, and we make it repeatable. So we have those deployment guidelines, and then we also have a zero trust workshop format where we guide a customer literally in order what to do first, then can do after that, and then when they go to a more mature state, what to do. Like we have plenty of collateral to help, and hopefully we can put some links in the description of this podcast so folks can look at it.
I think the one thing I would add to that is, especially kind of in the smaller organizations where there's less complexity, right? I mean, our products are designed to be able to be configured and deployed sort of by an admin persona in the portal in a familiar kind of UX type experience, right? So it doesn't require deep coding and everything. And one of the really nice things with the product is, it's configurable in the sense of there are knobs and tubes that we give you that you can configure to kind of make your processes enabled. And then where there's deep extensibility needs, right, we have natively supported extensibility hooks where you can invoke your custom code and run that, right? But for the smaller organizations and the more straightforward requirements, right, they can go and get value from it day one. You don't need to go hire an external partner. Many of the larger customers do partner closely to get this deployed, but those are typically for the really more complex environments.
And I want to add that when we approach deployment of IGA capabilities in an identity platform like Entra, it's not just one feature, not just one tool, not a management tool like a traditional on-premises world was. We see these as scenarios. These are a collection of features that drive an outcome. Maybe you want to bring your employee onboarding and governance, or your external user onboarding and governance, bringing it together on the same platform. And because it's IGA built on Entra, we get those other capabilities like an Entra suite, where we're bringing things together to give governance, but then also zero trust access to on-premises private applications or internet applications. So how do we take a suite of features and deliver solutions that are easily able to be deployed?
Right. So Tee, I think you mentioned a bit earlier about access packages. So I think that not everybody watching today will be familiar with that term. So what is an access package? Maybe you can give us a little bit of idea of how that differs from how you might have assigned security in on-premises Active Directory. And how should customers think about the difference between an access package and an access review?
Sure. Yeah, great. So access packages are simply collections of resources that typically are assigned and removed altogether, right? So a simple example might be, a company has a SharePoint that all members of the marketing group get access to. And all members of the marketing group also have access to, a particular distribution list. And all members of the marketing department have these other access that everybody gets, right? So it would make sense for those resources to be packaged together in one entity, which we call an access package. And maybe in this example of the marketing department, that's something that the policy that the business defines says, hey, any user in the directory who has the following attributes, marketing, this company code, whatever it is, that they get this access package, this collection of resources assigned to them automatically. And if they leave the organization or leave the department and switch to the sales team, they no longer match the policy, and that set of birthright access to the marketing department's removed, and maybe there's another set that gets assigned. And then the other way that this is used, in addition to kind of the birthright access, is requestable or assignable access packages, right? So it's the same collection of resource concepts, but things that you can't necessarily programmatically determined ahead of time by policy who should get it, right? So that could be a company-wide V team where members of the V team need to have access to the set of resources that they need, whether they're groups or Teams channels or SharePoint sites or even access to Entra roles or Azure RBAC roles or whatever the collection of resources are that make sense that can be requested by an individual or assigned to them by their manager or the administrator. And this equally applies to guests, right? So you can kind of see the different ways that it can be used, but the concept at the most simple level is a collection of resources that are assigned and removed sort of all at the same time. So business roles often are kind of ways that customers think about that also.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe like the way I sometimes tell it to customers is kind of that's how you should be granting access, is like groups plus like in steroids. So with the access packages, is not only granting access, right? Because you can just do directly to the workload and add Jef to the SharePoint side directly, but that introduces problems, right? It introduces like staleness over time. So when Jef moves on and then he becomes a vice president, then he still has that access to the SharePoint side. Maybe he doesn't need it on the one hand. On the other hand, how do you prove an auditor that you did the control and who has access to those resources in a timely manner? So that is one of the main areas that the access packages gives a lot of tools for those scenarios. And also like the bells and whistles that come around how to get the access. Is it for a period of time? So I can grant access only for 3 months, for example. And then I want to have people to request access again if they need it after 3 months, or only once for 3 months in case that we have a time-bound project, for example. or things like I need an approver. So all these things that are sometimes, repeatable and automatable process, this is the tool to make that, quote unquote, codified in a repeatable and systematic way.
And to add on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jeff. I realize if you could also touch on the access review part, and okay. Close the loop on that. So yeah.
I was just about to. Yeah. So the plus part of access packages, the way I look at it is an access packages can manage policy-based controls or multiple policy-based controls for the complete access lifecycle, not just identity lifecycle, but who can be assigned, how do they get assigned, who has to approve it, how long should it exist for, and when should it be removed. And that's where access reviews comes in. We can use policies that automatically expire access assignments to access packages where they can re-request, or we can periodically have a third party or secondary party review access to make sure it's appropriate. So access reviews is managing part of that full access lifecycle, where entitlement management is across the entire lifecycle of that access.
Right. So this brings us on nicely, I think, to automation. So we've talked about this full life cycle. So somebody joins a company, potentially they move from one department to another maybe, and maybe then at some point they leave the company. So what kind of signals can you look for to automate that process with Entra ID Governance?
I can start with that.
Put that to Tee.
Yeah. So the ideal state is a company connects up their HR system, right? So we get the automated signals real time as they happen. Right. So we have out-of-the-box connectors to different HR sources. We have a rich provisioning API using skim payloads for third-party connections. There's a bunch of different ways to get your identity data automated into Entra ID. And under the automation scenario, right, then we're able to pick up those queues directly from the HR system. Future termination dates. We can start to run, lifecycle workflow tasks on, hey, a week before a planned date that someone's leaving the company, trigger an email to the manager and do these other tasks. And we have visibility to all of this type of data. And same thing for, pre-hire type scenarios. And then as part of the automation around birthright entitlements and things like that, right, we can look at those attributes that are associated with the user object, for example, right? So the department and the company and whatever other, attributes that make sense to run your business process logic against. Similarly, sort of in the mover scenarios, right? Same sort of things, right? Hey, when some of these key attributes change that indicate a mover's, or that a person's moving between, to a new role, we can trigger things like, access reviews and removal of birthright entitlements and those types of things. And then there are some customers that have not connected their HR systems, right? But they still have some mechanism where they are getting the user identity into Entra ID. And sometimes that's as simple as, they are, their HR systems are running on-prem and they're connecting to Active Directory, which is syncing up to Entra, right? So we're still getting the signals through automation, just kind of coming, through an on-prem sync process. Or even, companies that are kind of doing this manually and they're manually entering something on the user object, and, we pick up those signals, right? So we basically look for changes on the user object, kind of as the base way to pick up signals that we want to take actions against.
Right. Okay.
And okay, so
go on. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. So you touched on HR provisioning, and I do see that as the foundational. We want to get that authoritative employee data about the business to drive our identity actions, and we can use that for additional governance actions, right? So automating the lifecycle workflows or automating assignments to access packages to assign to applications. But it doesn't stop there, because provisioning is also from Entra to the applications, right? So Entra has capabilities that go through that entire lifecycle from beginning, during, and then finally clean up, removing the access when it's no longer appropriate. So it's a multiple set of capabilities that enable that lifecycle.
Yeah. And then one thing that I want to just build on top of what Jef and Tee were saying is that along the way, we also provide hooks to create extensibility to automate. So a lot of customers have, for example, part of the process that require human intervention with, let's say, an ITSM ticket support with ServiceNow, for example. So we can also orchestrate flows where when the user the access is assigned, then trigger an ITSM ticket. So, for example, if we have even think scenarios like, I don't know, physical access. Here at Microsoft, we have, just as an example, we for some privileged access, we need a dedicated hardware, just as an example. Right? So you can orchestrate, hey, I need this a special hardware as part of business operation, right? So I became an engineer, and now I need to do something in the production system, then that triggers additional steps like that. And that has been a very important capability for us as we work with customers of all sizes and all verticals and all that have many needs and many requirements. So we were just with a customer last week, and they were telling us that this extensibility with logic apps was the most turnkey feature for him to finish a migration project. It's a lot of things that you can put along the way.
And supportability of extensibility is key to actually being effective. We see many traditional IGA solutions, automated solutions with these bespoke sort of programming interfaces or workflow models that somebody has to learn, manage, update, and it actually becomes a lot of tech debt over time, right? So our model is be able to extend in a low-code, no-code way when we need to, giving the ability for admins and business admins to actually describe that business process and implement it, right? So it's something that they can deploy, support, and progress as the business progresses without the tech debt.
Okay. Interesting. So when you say low-code, no-code, is AI involved in that process at this stage, or is it, I don't know, based on Power Automate, or what sits behind that?
Great question. So our extensibility, we have extensibility points in using logic apps in entitlement management, in provisioning, and in lifecycle workflows. These are all those same logic apps, right? So now I can go into the Azure Logic apps, use the what you see is what you get sort of code or workflow editor, or I can create a document that describes it, right? So utilizing those. But we also do have AI for governance that will help an admin actually configure those workflows automatically too. So we're bringing those AI to augment the admin. And with AI, since you mentioned it, because we're talking about governance, these capabilities are also governing AI. Just like we can assign access to users, we can assign access to AI agents, and agents can request access.
Right. So that's internal users and AI agents, if we can call them mainly internal users, I guess. But what about external users? So I've got contractors, vendors, partners. Do you take a similar approach to governing them, or is this a whole different ballgame? So I'll put that back to Jef.
Yeah, great question. So when we say onboarding, we do mean all the different persona types, right? Your internal employees, your contractors, they may be coming from different data sources, but they're using that same conduit and those same governance controls. But this also applies to your external partners. Because we're built on Entra B2B capabilities, right? We don't have to give them credentials that we have to manage and then for them to share. We can leverage those B2B capabilities and modern zero trust controls, and not just for our internal employees, but for our external employees. So they actually can onboard using the same set of tools like the My Access portal. And if they meet the criteria of the policies, they can request access, get approved, and have that entire life cycle. And one of the best parts of onboarding through governance, instead of just doing direct invites, is we have a lifecycle policy for guest users. When access is assigned through entitlement management and that last access is removed, whether it's access reviews or expiration, right, that B2B user can be disabled and removed from the tenant. So you don't have that buildup of stale guests that you have to manage. The policy-based controls are managing it for you.
So when you say Entra B2B user, does that mean that, are you saying you don't have to create a separate user account for them in your tenant? This is some kind of, I don't know, single sign-on thing that allows them to use their account in their own tenant to sign on to your tenant, or what does that look like exactly?
Yeah, great question. So historically, organizations would create a local credential, a username, a password, something else, or MFA provider to give to the partners. But because we're an identity platform that has multiple capabilities for authentication and whatnot, we can inviting that user to come in and bring their own credential to access our resources. We can apply the same set of policies on what access they can have, but also things like conditional access. We could require controls when they actually access that, just like our regular users. So now we don't have to manage a password, manage a credential. They could bring it and get that single sign-on, but we still apply all of our policies on our resources. So we're managing access, not credentials anymore.
Right, got it. Okay, so external users, internal users, okay. What about situations where we have on-premises Active Directory or a hybrid system where Active Directory is connected to Entra ID? Does Entra ID Governance work in those scenarios?
Absolutely. So, and this is one of the main areas we have to meet the customers where they are, right? So we have a lot of customers that still use Active Directory. So we have like multiple areas, right? So on the one hand, we help provisioning customers' target system, including Active Directory. So from HR directly, our provisioning engine can create the account in Active Directory, and then if it's hybrid, then Entra Connect or Cloud Sync will synchronize the user, so we get that orchestration done. So that is provisioning side, right? On the other hand, we also have capabilities to grant access to groups, and some groups sometimes are on premises, and that is a huge investment that customers have there. So what we have been investing in is to have the ability to what we call govern from the cloud, even though the resource is on-prem. So what we've invested in a hybrid infrastructure where you can do all the cool stuff that we mentioned, all the plus part of Entra ID Governance with lifecycle workflows, for example, or expiration policies, all that cool stuff that is natively implemented in the cloud as part of Entra ID Governance. But then when those policies happen to be applied to on-prem resources, then infrastructure kind of connects to execute the changes in Active Directory on-prem. What we have seen actually with customers is that they have seen, over time, like stepping back, like, do we need these many groups in on premises if we're going to do stuff in the cloud? So we also have been investing not only on our tooling, but also in our messaging to customers on, hey, now you can start cleaning out those Active Directory groups, because a lot of customers turn out. We have seen time and again, the customers happen to have a ton of groups because their existing IGA tool only worked on premises, and now they have a great opportunity to start cleaning that up over time. So that's one layer, and there are many other scenarios like that, and we are excited to help customers to do that group hygiene on-premise or for groups. But then the next frontier is getting the users, right? So a lot of our customers are now in this position where, hey, we have modernized a ton of our apps, and we've seen, and Tia and I were visiting a customer in the East Coast last week, and they were telling us, hey, we have this affiliate entity. And then they have their employees are not even an ID anymore. And then the way they achieve that is because the platform gives them flexibility to choose either create a cloud-only account or a hybrid account, and they've been able to, they've been in a position to, I would say, literally reducing half the risk of inherent to having Active Directory footprint because of this flexibility to get into that. Optimize, only have the footprint on ID when you need it.
Right. And I want to add what you said. Even though we're given the source of authority to move from on-prem to the Entra, but there are also scenarios where I actually want to manage access from Entra to existing apps on-prem, right? So I have not migrated the app yet. Maybe I have a database or an LDAP directory that's still on-prem. It's going to exist for a while. Entra can actually connect that using our on-premises provisioning agents to manage the assignments from Entra, all using all that goodness of entitlement management, access reviews, but provisioning directly to those underlying applications that are still on-prem. So even if the app is not using Entra for authentication, it can be governed by Entra today.
Right, okay. So I just want to step back a little bit. So if I understood correctly, what you said, Ramiro, is that on-premises Active Directory, even if it's not connected or even if it's not synced to Entra ID, can be managed by Entra ID Governance. Did I understand that correctly?
I would say we have the requirement of synchronization mainly because customers also authenticate to Active Directory today. So what we are optimizing for is for that ID that you already have for your users, then you can start managing those groups from that Active Directory because it's all kind of connected in the ID.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Absolutely makes sense.
So you have to have a footprint of the group.
Yeah.
And then the user also needs to be in Entra. But to your point, is customers are starting to see this as a path to decoupling over time from that infrastructure, having less and less footprint, because you can create a group, and if whether you need the group on-prem or in the cloud is just a matter of what are the target workloads are you using that group for? Not necessarily, because it's an imposition and that kind of keeps the user, the organization stuck in that, I have to have AD. And that's one of the areas we're helping customers to move away of over time.
Okay. One thing, talking about some of the patterns that we publish for customers to look at best practices and repeatable, templates that work and things, right? I mean, so Ramiro and team have published a journey to the cloud that we talk about, kind of 5 steps of customers getting potentially to a full cloud-first, cloud-only state, right? And we hear from a lot of customers like, hey, I don't know that I ever want to be cloud-only, right? I want to continue on my journey to the cloud and maybe minimize my on-prem footprint, but realistically, I don't think I'm ever going to shut down all of my on-prem environment, right? So we're very deliberate with the capabilities that we're bringing to customers to allow them to look and kind of move towards the cloud at the speed that makes sense for them and in the approach that makes sense for them, right? So again, going back to you've always had the ability to do a big bang, hey, I'm going to cut over everything overnight to be cloud only, right? You've always had that ability, right? But now you also have the ability to say, hey, I'm going to take subsets of my users or subsets of my groups and convert those to be cloud only, and then either clean them up from Active Directory if they're not needed there anymore, or if I do need them on-prem still, I've just shifted the control plane to Entra, and then we'll provision them back to AD, right? And so we sort of have the same approach for, broadly speaking, on-prem hybrid customers. They're like, hey, there's users and groups, there's applications, there's devices, right? And a path forward for all of them at the speed that makes sense for the customer.
Okay. So, Jef, if, for instance, I decide I'm going to allow Entra ID Governance to be Entra ID or Entra to be my source of authority for managing on-premises Active Directory as well. We're going to keep a hybrid scenario, maybe as you just pointed out, could be forever. Are there some operational do's and don'ts about how you should go about maybe implementing that or managing that situation?
Yeah, great question. So like Ramiro said, we start with our world of starting on-prem. We've moved to hybrid because we're managing on-prem, synchronizing to the cloud. But now we want to start managing from the cloud. There's some key things that I want to do. Usually customers start with groups. Groups they exist everywhere. They exist for decades and nobody really knows what they do. So we actually publish guidance on how you as an admin could go and review your groups, find the ones that are no longer needed and just remove them. They're not being used. Let's not need to manage them. But for those other groups, we can actually convert that source of authority and say, this group is no longer managed on-prem, we're going to move that management to Entra. And if it's only used in Entra, I can delete it on-prem. I don't need it on-prem anymore. Right. But if I still need to use or consume that group because the application is still on-prem, I can now write that group membership back. So now I can manage from Entra, do all that goodness, and write those membership changes directly back to AD and consume on AD until I remove all those workloads. And then we're also looking at not just the groups, but the user identities, right? So today I am provisioning users from HR to on-prem AD and going the hybrid route. But now we have customers who are now saying, well, my frontline workers don't access on-premises anymore. Let's actually provision them directly to Entra. So let's have an HR connector that creates them directly in Entra. But we also have the scenario where they started in AD, they want to move to Entra. We've brought that source of authority transfer to user. So that user was managed on-prem, even though they weren't being used on-prem anymore, can now be managed to Entra. So now I'm moving slowly over that life cycle to Entra or cloud first with that 80 reach back. And then as I slowly either persist resources or migrate them, I become cloud native. So all this is documented in that what we call the road to cloud that walks through all those steps.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then I want to build on top of it just to broaden the story, right? So as Jef mentioned at the beginning, ID governance is one step on a broader toolkit with the Entra suite. So we talked about provisioning to groups, provisioning access, and like in general, granting access to a resource, right? So that's one part of the access. The other is authentication, which we have with Entra, right? The Entra ID, right? But then another area that where the strength of our offering kind of shines through, in my opinion, is that we can also tie that all together with accessing the network as an example. So back to scenarios that Jef was saying, it's not just because it's clean in a piece of paper to have the triangle native with less users and more users in Entra, is reduction of risk. So you are not even granting the vector to get to the network in the first place unless you need it. Back to what he was saying about initial access. So we have been investing with the global secure access capability, the ability to grant access only to this, IP address and port, and then wrap it up as an application. And that gives us not only the ability to grant, the networking connectivity, right, but also the policies to it. So if you model one on-premises app as part of an access package, for example, just putting the dots with what Tee was saying is like, hey, we have to have a business justification. It's only for 30 days, or it's only based on job function, and then we'll give you access to the specific segment of the network that you need. So it's all coming together when you put the access, the authentication, and access to the network, and then all these other things kind of light up. So it's a whole story. And then what I would say is, just to take it a step further, is that customers who are in AD, they really, really need to protect themselves and reduce risk with cloud tools. So governance is one step to this privilege, but authentication with modern auth methods, right? So we have invested a lot in unphishable credentials. That's not necessarily something that you can easily replicate on premises, and then putting all those modern controls even to your on-premises AD-based applications. This is an essential step to reduce risk.
Right. Okay. So it's one thing managing the life cycle of 10 users, the governance of those users, the security, etc. But how should organizations think about approaching this if they're managing tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users? Are there any specific considerations that they should take into account? I'll put that to Tee.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful question that we hope all customers are asking before they jump into something. So, I started my career doing SAP implementations when everyone was worried about Y2K, right? And the successful SAP implementations that we saw were companies that were willing to step back and look and say, just because we've always done something one way doesn't mean we should go keep doing it the same way. And instead, they'd adapt to some of the SAP best practices and implementation patterns, right? And I see a parallel here at large-scale design, right? Hey, what's worked for us in the past may not be the right pattern for us to approach going forward tomorrow, right? So stepping back and looking and saying, how do I design and take advantage of all the delegation capabilities and restricted admin units and all the capabilities that Entra and governance supports, and be thoughtful about how I want to approach this at scale, so I don't find myself a year from now boxed into a corner with some of these design patterns, right? So it's looking at segmenting by business unit, looking at standardizing across access catalogs, and avoiding giant packages that suddenly you can't segment or delegate appropriately, and that operational model and the clear ownerships, and sort of we have a lot of published guidance around how to thoughtfully approach and design your implementation to be successful. And I would ask Jef to kind of jump in too. I know he has a lot of thoughts in this space also.
Okay.
Yeah, and also the thing to keep in mind is while we're talking governance, because it's related capabilities in Entra, for example, you may want to deploy those that complement each other. So instead of we've always managed passwords, we've always synchronized passwords to applications, take the opportunity to move the password list, right? Modernizing those apps, getting rid of that legacy artifact of managing password. That way you don't have to manage something, but also securing those end users and authentication at the same time. So look at how you get that force multiplier for the effort that your organization is spending.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on top of that, one of the things that I would say is like we have so Entra ID and our services, security services in general are SaaS based, right? So there's a lot of friction that we have reduced deployment wise. So we have heard from customers, hey, back in the day when I started this identity management tool on premises, it took me a year and change to get rolling. Whereas here we have been optimized and very deliberate to make sure that customers have the ability to do that at velocity and at scale quickly. So you can jump from, I don't know, years to implement and have the controls to weeks, right? So that also is something we want to encourage customers, right? Because it was so painful in the past to deploy and customize and role model and all these things. It was so painful. What we have found, and Jef can correct me if I'm wrong, we have found that some customers do this whole rigor, the controls and proper governance, only for the subset of applications that are like, they have to because they're auditing. And that is super important that they need that because literally they were forced to by regulations, but now we have an opportunity and the scale to apply those same rigor to the broader enterprise with the same rigor, but with velocity and with breadth of coverage, right? Because that is, governance is security, so ideally we should do it all over the place, right? So that is now a great opportunity with the cloud to do that at scale and quickly and consistently and with a lot of automation, as Tee pointed out before.
Yeah, and I'd just add, there's nothing like success that builds upon itself to create more success, right? And I think, especially in the more complex environments, right? We have an amazing Microsoft partner ecosystem. Many of them are highly, highly adept in implementing identity governance. We get great feedback to continually improve the products based on real world deployment experiences, right? And I think many of them would encourage customers as they're going down this implementation route, like pick something tangible, scope it, stay to that scope, show early success, right? Because that creates that internal momentum and buy-in to keep building upon that. So in addition to, yes, orchestrate and design how you want to do all this, like show that rapid time to value, right? And that is a great kind of pattern, I think, to get to that end state.
Okay, well, wow, that was a lot of information, and I certainly learned a few things. I didn't really know a huge amount about Entra ID Governance, to be honest, before we had this discussion today. So I'd really like to thank you all for your time, for educating me and our viewers. So I hope it's something that we will start to cover more on Petri as this becomes increasingly important, especially with AI agents also becoming part of the problem more increasingly these days. So we're going to put some links to some of the resources that you mentioned in the description box of the video. So you mentioned the Road to Cloud documents. Is there anything else or anywhere else people should be looking for information?
Yeah, deployment guides, the Zero Trust workshop, the Road to Cloud document, and then we have some other auxiliary articles, but I think those three are the main ones that people can get to as an entry point and build out from there.
And I'd also add that if you have not looked at Entra ID Governance before, enable a trial and look at the documentation for proof of concepts, right? Because this may be new to an organization, but actually being able to go there and deploy it in your development environment and get hands-on just how simple it is to achieve these things. Don't take our word for it. Go and do it in your environment.
Right. Okay, great. I didn't know there was a trial available, so that's interesting. Yeah.
trial and
Okay,
the
great.
POC. So we documented step by step, like for example, govern access to external, which is one of the scenarios that a lot of customers have blind spots today. Is
Right.
go show value, and then you follow the POC guide, and you will see like right away.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thank you again, Ramiro, Tee, and Jef, for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you, Russell.
Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you again sometime soon.